Your worth is not determined by another's perception of it. True value comes from within. There was a Sunday afternoon when I was 68, standing at my kitchen window watching the rain paint patterns on the glass, when I finally understood something that had eluded me for nearly 7 decades. The phone had been silent for 3 days, 3 days of waiting for a call from someone whose opinion had somehow become more important to me than my own breath. The silence stretched before me like an ocean, and in that vast emptiness, I heard something I'd been deaf to my entire life. The sound of my own worth, steady and unwavering, regardless of who was or wasn't listening. That moment changed everything, not because the phone finally rang, it didn't, but because I stopped waiting for it to. I stopped measuring my value by the frequency of others' attention, stopped calculating my importance by how desperately people seemed to need me, stopped determining my worth by whether someone chose to see it or not. The revelation was both devastatingly simple and profoundly liberating. I had been looking for my reflection in mirrors that were never meant to show me who I really was. If you've reached the season of life where your hair holds more silver than gold and your eyes carry the weight of experience, you know this particular ache. The sharp sting of feeling invisible to someone whose vision once made you feel fully alive. The hollow echo of giving your whole heart to someone who barely noticed its beating. The bone-deep exhaustion of trying to prove your value to someone who had already decided you weren't worth their time. But here's what 6 decades of living have taught me about those moments when someone doesn't value you. The pain isn't really about them at all. It's about the part of you that forgot your own worth somewhere along the way, the part that started believing external validation was more reliable than internal truth, the part that handed over the keys to your self-worth to someone who never asked for that responsibility and certainly didn't deserve it. When we feel undervalued by others, our instinct is to do something, anything, to change their perception. We want to prove, to convince, to demonstrate our worth until they have no choice but to see it. But these reactions, born from desperation rather than wisdom, only dig us deeper into the very hole we're trying to escape. Today, let me share with you 5 things you must absolutely resist doing when someone doesn't value you, not to change their mind, but to preserve your own soul. Don't chase their approval like a moth to flame. The ancient wisdom tells us that those who display themselves do not have true insight. Those who boast about themselves have no merit. Those who praise themselves do not endure. Yet when someone fails to see our worth, our first impulse is often to stage an elaborate performance of our value, as if we could somehow force recognition through sheer effort and spectacle. I remember watching my neighbor Elena do this dance for months with her adult daughter. Elena, a retired teacher who had spent 40 years nurturing young minds, suddenly found herself desperately trying to prove her relevance to a daughter, too busy with her own life to notice her mother's quiet contributions. Elena would cook elaborate meals that went unappreciated, send long letters that received one-word responses, share achievements that were met with distracted nods. The more Elena performed, the more exhausted she became, and the more her daughter seemed to withdraw from what felt like emotional obligation rather than genuine connection. What Elena didn't realize, what none of us realize when we're caught in this desperate spiral, is that seeking approval from someone who doesn't naturally offer it is like trying to draw water from an empty well. You can lower the bucket again and again, but if there's no water there, you'll only exhaust yourself in the effort. The well isn't broken because it's empty. It's simply not meant to be your source. The wisest among us understand that true power comes not from being seen by others, but from seeing ourselves clearly. Water doesn't struggle to be recognized as life-giving. It simply flows where it's needed and nourishes what it touches. It doesn't demand appreciation or fight for acknowledgement. It knows its nature, understands its purpose, and moves according to its own truth rather than others' opinions. When you stop chasing approval, something remarkable happens. You discover that your worth was never actually dependent on external recognition. The sunset doesn't become less beautiful because some people are too busy to notice it. The ocean doesn't become less vast because some ships never venture beyond the harbor. Your value doesn't diminish because someone lacks the capacity or willingness to perceive it. Instead of seeking their approval, turn that energy inward. Cultivate what the ancients called D, your inner virtue, your authentic power, your unshakable sense of self that exists independent of others' opinions. Learn to appreciate your own thoughts, value your own insights, trust your own instincts. Become the kind of person who doesn't need external validation because internal recognition is so complete and satisfying. Don't try to control their perception of you. There's a particular kind of suffering that comes from trying to manage how others see you, a futile wrestling match with forces completely outside your influence. It's like trying to hold your breath to control the wind, exhausting and ultimately pointless. The ancient teachings remind us that the world is a sacred vessel, not something to be grasped or controlled, and that those who try to seize it inevitably lose what they're trying to hold. I learned this lesson through my relationship with my brother Marcus, a successful businessman who had never quite forgiven me for choosing a different path. For years, I exhausted myself, trying to prove to him that my choice to become a librarian was valid, that my quieter life had value, that my contentment was real, even if it didn't match his definition of success. I would carefully craft conversations to highlight my achievements, strategically mention the respect I received from colleagues, subtly defend my choices whenever we spoke. The more I tried to control his perception, the more strained our relationship became. My efforts to manage his opinion felt manipulative to him and devastating to me when they inevitably failed. I was trying to force him to see me through my own eyes rather than accepting that his vision was shaped by his own values, experiences, and limitations, none of which I could change. The turning point came when I finally understood that his inability to value my choices said nothing about my choices and everything about his own narrow definition of worth. I couldn't control his perception any more than I could control the weather, and trying to do so was stealing energy from actually living the life I was so desperately trying to defend. True strength lies not in controlling how others see you, but in being so secure in your own truth that their perception becomes irrelevant. The softest things in the world overcome the hardest, not through force but through persistent authenticity. Water doesn't argue with rock about the best path. It simply flows around obstacles until it finds its way. When you stop trying to control others' perceptions, you free yourself from an impossible burden. You can finally focus on being authentic rather than strategic, on living genuinely rather than performing continuously. You discover that the relationships worth having are the ones where you don't need to manage anyone's opinion, where your true self is welcomed rather than tolerated. Don't betray your soul for their acceptance. Perhaps the most devastating thing we do when someone doesn't value us is to abandon our authentic selves in a desperate attempt to become someone they might appreciate more. We sacrifice our principles, compromise our values, diminish our true nature, all in service of an acceptance that, even if achieved, feels hollow because it's based on a false version of ourselves. The wise have always warned us about this particular trap. We sacrifice principles we esteem through fear of being blamed by people we actually despise. We exaggerate our virtues or hide our authentic thoughts to gain favor from those whose approval shouldn't matter to us. In doing so, we become strangers to ourselves, actors playing roles we never auditioned for in someone else's production. I think of my friend Catherine, a brilliant artist who spent years trying to win her family's approval by gradually abandoning everything that made her unique. She stopped painting because they considered it impractical. She took a corporate job because they valued financial security above creativity. She even changed her style of dress, her way of speaking, her circle of friends, all to become someone her family might finally see as worthy of their respect. The tragedy wasn't that she failed to win their approval. The tragedy was that she succeeded. By the time they finally accepted her, there was so little of her authentic self left that the acceptance felt meaningless. She had won their love for someone she wasn't and lost her connection to someone she was. The price of their acceptance was her own soul, and it proved to be far too high. Your authentic self is not negotiable. Your core values are not up for auction. Your unique perspective is not a rough draft waiting for someone else's editing. You came into this world with something distinctive to offer, and you diminish the world when you try to sand away your edges to fit into someone else's idea of what you should be. The people who truly belong in your life will value you not despite your authenticity, but because of it. They'll appreciate your unique perspective, respect your firm principles, celebrate your individual way of moving through the world. If someone can only value you when you've betrayed your true nature, then what they value isn't you at all. It's their own projection of who they think you should be. Stand firm in your truth. Let your character be solid as stone, unshakable in its foundation. The freedom to refuse what diminishes you and choose what elevates you is your birthright. Don't trade it for the temporary comfort of someone else's approval. Don't drown in the poison of your own emotions. When someone fails to value us, the emotional response can be swift and devastating. Anger, resentment, self-blame, and bitter disappointment flood our system like poison, and our natural instinct is often to either fight these feelings or completely surrender to them. Both approaches lead to suffering, one through resistance, the other through drowning. The mind, in its attempt to process rejection, often becomes its own worst enemy. It replays conversations, dissects interactions, searches for evidence of inadequacy, creates elaborate stories about what we should have done differently. We torture ourselves with questions that have no satisfying answers. Why don't they see my worth? What's wrong with me? How can I make them care? But this internal struggle only amplifies our suffering. The more we fight against the pain of not being valued, the more power we give it over our lives. The more we struggle to escape the reality of someone's indifference, the more we become consumed by it. As the wise observe, trying to escape pain often inflames the very agony we're trying to flee. I learned this during a particularly dark period when a lifelong friendship ended abruptly. Instead of allowing myself to grieve and move forward, I became obsessed with understanding why my friend had withdrawn, what I had done wrong, how I could fix what felt irreparably broken. The original pain of losing the friendship was multiplied tenfold by my refusal to accept the reality of the situation. The breakthrough came when I finally stopped fighting the pain and started observing it with curiosity rather than resistance. I noticed how the hurt felt in my body, acknowledged the disappointment without trying to fix it, allowed the sadness to exist without making it mean something catastrophic about my worth. When I stopped struggling against the emotion, it gradually transformed from a wild animal trapped in a cage to a messenger delivering important information about what I truly valued. True wisdom lies not in avoiding painful emotions, but in learning to be present with them without being consumed by them. When you feel the sting of not being valued, don't run from it or fight it. Acknowledge it, feel it fully, then let it pass through you like weather moving across a landscape. The feeling isn't permanent unless you make it so. Transform any anger into energy for affirming your own worth. Channel disappointment into clarity about what you truly want from relationships. Use rejection as information about compatibility rather than evidence of inadequacy. Your emotions are temporary visitors, not permanent residents. Honor them, learn from them, then show them to the door. Don't abandon your own growth and development. The greatest tragedy of being undervalued by someone is not their failure to see your worth. It's the possibility that their blindness might cause you to stop seeing it yourself. When we're caught in the pain of not being appreciated, we often make the fatal mistake of shrinking, stopping our growth, abandoning our development in a misguided attempt to avoid further rejection. But this betrays the highest duty we owe to ourselves, the commitment to continuous growth and self-realization. Every person must educate themselves, develop their potential, nurture their unique gifts. When we stop growing because someone doesn't value who we are, we rob the world of who we might become. The spirit of gravity tries to convince us to accept heavy judgments from others, to carry their opinions like stones in our pockets. But you were not born to live according to someone else's limited vision of your potential. You were born to realize your nature perfectly, to discover what you're truly capable of, to become the fullest expression of yourself, regardless of who witnesses your journey. I think of the years I wasted after my ex-husband told me I wasn't intelligent enough to pursue graduate school. Instead of letting his opinion motivate me to prove him wrong, I let it convince me he might be right. I abandoned my dreams of advanced education, stopped reading challenging books, avoided intellectual conversations. I made his lack of faith in my abilities more important than my own curiosity and drive. It took years to undo that damage, to rebuild my confidence in my own mind, to pursue the education I should have started decades earlier. By the time I finally earned my master's degree at 62, I realized that the person whose opinion had mattered most, my own, had been silenced by someone whose opinion should have mattered least. Don't make the same mistake. When someone doesn't value you, double down on valuing yourself. Invest more deeply in your own development, not to prove them wrong, but to honor what's right in you. Pursue your interests with even greater passion. Develop your talents with increased dedication. Expand your mind, strengthen your character, deepen your wisdom. The path of continuous growth is not about becoming someone else might approve of. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. It's about honoring the potential within you that exists, regardless of external recognition. It's about being a creating one, always willing to surpass your previous limitations and evolve into something more magnificent. Your growth is not dependent on anyone else's permission or appreciation. Your development doesn't require external validation or support. Your journey toward becoming your fullest self is a sacred responsibility that belongs to you alone. Don't abandon it because someone else can't see where you're going. When you commit to your own growth despite others' lack of appreciation, something beautiful happens. You become magnetic to people who can actually see and value what you're becoming. You attract relationships based on genuine appreciation rather than desperate need. You discover that the most fulfilling connections come not from proving your worth to those who doubt it, but from sharing your abundance with those who recognize it. Reclaiming the sacred territory of your self-worth. Understanding these 5 things not to do when someone doesn't value you is really understanding one fundamental truth. Your worth was never theirs to determine in the first place. You were born with inherent value that exists independent of recognition, appreciation, or approval. That value doesn't fluctuate based on who sees it or celebrates it. It remains constant, like the North Star, regardless of whether anyone is looking up at the sky. The journey to truly accepting this truth is rarely smooth or quick. We've been conditioned from childhood to seek external validation, to measure our worth by others' responses, to believe that love must be earned through performance rather than simply received as a birthright. Unlearning these patterns takes time, patience, and tremendous self-compassion. But every step toward reclaiming your own worth is a step toward freedom. Freedom from the exhausting work of trying to convince others of your value. Freedom from the constant anxiety of wondering if you're enough. Freedom from the devastating impact of others' opinions on your sense of self. Freedom to live authentically, love genuinely, and contribute meaningfully without needing anyone's permission or approval. The way of true wisdom benefits without causing harm, acts without striving, leads without forcing. When you embody this way of being, you naturally attract people who can appreciate your authentic value while remaining unshaken by those who cannot. You become like water, soft yet powerful, yielding yet persistent, giving yet never depleted. Your life is too precious to spend it auditioning for roles in other people's stories. Your energy is too valuable to waste trying to convince the unconvincible. Your heart is too worthy to break it against the walls of someone else's limitations. Save your performance for an audience that deserves the show, yourself, and those wise enough to recognize authentic value when they see it. Remember, dear friend, that true respect comes from aligning with your inner truth, understanding your own strength, and recognizing that your worth is not negotiable. Let your value shine from within, steady and bright, regardless of who chooses to bask in its light. Some will see it and be grateful. Others will miss it entirely. Both responses say everything about them and nothing about you. The sun doesn't stop shining because clouds block its light from reaching the earth. It continues to burn bright, knowing that its value isn't diminished by temporary obstructions. You are that sun. Your worth is that constant. Your light is that enduring. Shine on, regardless of who's watching, knowing that your value was never dependent on their vision in the first place. For the younger hearts who might be listening to these reflections, wondering if they apply to your still-forming understanding of love and worth, please know that learning these lessons early is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. Don't wait until your hair is silver and your heart is scarred to understand that your value comes from within. Don't spend decades seeking approval from people whose opinions shouldn't matter more than your own. Build your sense of self on the solid foundation of your own worth. Cultivate relationships that celebrate your authenticity rather than tolerate it. Learn early what it took me decades to understand, that the most important validation you'll ever receive is the one you give yourself. When you master this art young, you save yourself years of unnecessary suffering and free yourself to experience the kind of love that recognizes and celebrates your worth rather than questioning or diminishing it. You are not too much for the right people. You are not too little for those who matter. You are exactly enough, exactly as you are in this moment, regardless of who else can see it. Trust this truth, protect it fiercely, and let it guide you toward the relationships and experiences that honor the magnificent person you already are.